What if I told you that the chaotic jumble of huts we are used to seeing in films about the Middle Ages was actually the perfect survival machine? We tend to think of these settlements as primitive, dirty, and devoid of any logic, but every turn of the street and every slope of the roof had a strict mathematical meaning. Ancient builders did not know the laws of thermodynamics, but they understood nature so well that they created energy-efficient systems out of clay and straw. Their main goal was not beauty or convenience, but to preserve precious heat, the loss of which meant certain death. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn what invisible detail in the roof construction saved entire families from freezing when the outside temperature dropped to deadly levels. Are you ready to learn the truth about why medieval streets were so crooked? The first thing that catches the eye when looking at a map of an old village is the absence of straight lines and wide avenues. To modern people, such a layout seems to be the result of a lack of planning, but in fact, it was a brilliant defense against the elements. The houses were not arranged randomly, but took into account the prevailing winds in the area. The seemingly chaotic layout created a complex system of aerodynamic barriers that broke up powerful air currents. If the streets had been straight, the icy winter wind would have raced along them like in a wind tunnel, blowing the heat out of every home. The winding passages and dead ends slowed down the wind, causing it to lose strength and bend around the residential buildings. The buildings huddled together, creating a monolithic effect, where each house protected its neighbor from the piercing cold. It resembled the principle of penguin formation in the Antarctic cold, where the survival of the group depends on the density of the formation. The central part of the settlement was always as closed off from external influences as possible, forming a quiet zone without drafts. The outermost houses took the brunt of the elements, so their walls were made especially thick and solid. Entrance doors were never oriented toward the windward side so that cold air would not rush inside when open. Even fences and wattle fences were built to direct snowdrifts to the right places in insulating the foundations. This layout allowed the temperature on the streets to be kept several degrees higher than in the open field. In the absence of central heating, these few degrees became critical for survival. People consciously sacrificed personal space and privacy for the sake of common thermal comfort. Cramped conditions were not a sign of poverty, but a necessary condition for survival in a harsh climate. The space between houses was just enough for a person or a cart to pass through, but no more. Narrow passages were less prone to snowdrifts and easier to clear after heavy snowfalls. The shade from the closely spaced buildings provided welcome coolness in summer and protection from the wind in winter. The entire village functioned as a single organism, tuned to resist the aggressive external environment. Engineers of the past understood that it was useless to fight nature with brute force, so they used cunning and geometry. They made the wind work according to their rules, turning it from an enemy into a harmless companion. The logic of survival dictated its own harsh architectural norms, which were strictly observed for centuries. Any deviation from these rules was punished by the cruel cold penetrating the dwelling. Interestingly, similar settlement structures can be found in various parts of the world with cold climates. This proves that people independently came to the same rational solutions. Centuries later, modern architects are studying this experience again, calling it bioclimatic design. But for medieval peasants, it was not science, but the only way to survive until spring. We often underestimate the intellectual abilities of our ancestors, considering their decisions primitive. However, the level of thoughtfulness in their daily lives is striking when viewed through the prism of resource efficiency. They built their houses not on paper, but on the ground, learning from their mistakes and passing on their knowledge from generation to generation. Every winding street is the experience of thousands of people's survival recorded in stone and wood. Today, we live in cities with wide avenues where the wind blows freely, blowing heat out of concrete boxes. We compensate for this with powerful heaters and huge amounts of energy. Medieval people could not afford such luxuries, so they used their heads before they started building. Do you agree with this? Please share your thoughts on this in the comments. Perhaps modern urban planners should learn from their ancestors? Want to know a secret that will change your perception of building materials? The walls of medieval dwellings were a true marvel of thermal insulation, created literally from rubbish found at their feet. The frame of the house was usually woven from branches and poles, forming a strong and flexible base similar to a basket. But the main magic lay in the filler used to fill this base. It was a mixture of clay, straw, sand, and water, thoroughly mixed with the feet until it became a homogeneous mass. This material, known as adobe or rammed earth, had amazing properties for retaining heat inside the room. Clay acted as a binder and heat accumulator, absorbing heat during the day and releasing it at night. The straw in the mixture acted as reinforcement, preventing cracking, and as an excellent insulator. The tubular structure of the dry stalks created thousands of microscopic air chambers that prevented the penetration of cold. The thickness of such walls could reach half a meter, creating a reliable buffer between the cozy interior and the cold outside. Unlike stone, which quickly froze and became a source of cold, clay walls remained warm to the touch. They regulated the humidity in the room, absorbing excess moisture and releasing it back when the air became dry. This natural climate control prevented the appearance of dampness and mold, which are harmful to health. The process of building such walls required enormous effort from the entire community, but the materials were free. Each layer was applied by hand, carefully compacted and dried in the sun. It was important to prevent the formation of voids through which insidious drafts could penetrate. The walls were often coated with lime on the outside, which not only gave them a neat appearance, but also protected the clay from being washed away by rain. The white color of the walls also had practical significance, reflecting excess sunlight in the summer and protecting the house from overheating. But in winter, these same walls reliably retained the heat generated by the hearth and the inhabitants of the house. Such dwellings were completely repairable. Any crack could be filled with a handful of fresh clay. This made the house practically eternal, provided it was regularly maintained and protected from moisture. Interestingly, similar technologies were even used in the construction of castles, where interior partitions were often made of the same material. This proves that the effectiveness of adobe walls was appreciated by all strata of society. The wealthy could afford wood paneling or tapestries, but the foundation was often the same clay. The simplicity of the technology did not mean it was primitive, it meant maximum rationality. In regions where there were many forests, log cabins were used, but they were also caulked with moss and clay with the same care. Every seam, every joint between the logs was checked for tightness with maniacal persistence. The slightest gap could negate all efforts to heat the dwelling on a frosty night. People literally sealed themselves in an airtight capsule, leaving only cold to the outside world. These walls were living witnesses to the changing seasons, expanding and contracting with the breath of the earth. They required constant attention, maintenance, and care, becoming part of the daily routine. The house was not a static form, it was a process in which all the inhabitants participated. Surprisingly, in terms of thermal performance, a properly constructed adobe wall is comparable to modern brickwork. Ancient craftsmen intuitively found the perfect balance between density and porosity of the material. They created a composite that has stood the test of millennia of harsh winters. But even the warmest walls are useless if you don't have a heat source. In the next chapter, you will learn how residents coped with heating without pipes and radiators.
Carrots over here.
Are you ready for the shocking truth about what heating really looked like? Most medieval homes did not have what we consider an essential element today, a chimney. The hearth was located right in the center of the only living room, on a dirt floor or a small platform. Smoke from the fire rose and filled the space under the roof, with no direct way out. This seems like a nightmare for modern people, but there was a logical reason for survival behind this solution. The smoke, accumulating under the roof, created a dense thermal curtain that prevented heat from escaping through the roof. This black pillow acted as an additional layer of insulation, trapping heated air inside the living space. Moreover, the smoke preserved the wooden structures of the roof, protecting them from rot and pests. The constant presence of smoke also disinfected the room, killing insects and microorganisms. Of course, living in such a house meant crouching down to the ground, where the air was relatively clean. Life took place on the lower level, in the clean air zone, while the upper part of the house was a technical area. All belongings, clothing, and utensils were impregnated with a specific smell that permeated the skin and hair forever. The hearth stones served as a powerful heat accumulator, continuing to warm the room even after the fire had died down. In the evening, when the flames died down, the stones released their stored energy, maintaining a comfortable temperature until morning. The place by the hearth was the most honorable and important, the center of the entire domestic universe. People slept, ate, worked, and waited out the long winter evenings around it. The absence of a chimney meant that precious heat did not escape into the sky, but remained in the house until the last joule. The efficiency of such an open hearth was higher than that of a fireplace with a straight chimney, which sucks out heat through draft. It was a black heating system that required habit and patience. Over time, the walls and ceiling inside became covered with a thick layer of shiny soot and tar. This layer served as additional insulation, filling the smallest pores and cracks in the structure. The inside of the house resembled a smoky cave, but this cave was warm and safe. Only much later, with the cheapening of bricks and the development of technology, did chimneys and stoves with pipes appear. But for centuries, it was open fires and smoke layers that saved people from freezing. It was a symbiosis of man and fire, where one had to endure discomfort for the sake of life. Fire required constant monitoring and could not be left unattended for a minute. The ability to stack wood correctly so that it smoldered and gave off heat, rather than flaring up and burning out, was an art. It determined whether the fuel supply would last until spring. This heating system dictated the way of life, the daily routine, and even the postures people adopted at home. Standing upright was a luxury available only outdoors. Inside the house, people always stood slightly bent over, as if bowing to the saving warmth. It's amazing how much comfort changes our perception. Today we complain about the dry air from radiators, but back then we were just happy that the water in the bucket didn't freeze. If you like this fact, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. What happened was that people learned to use the roof not just as a canopy, but as a complex engineering structure. The thatched or reed roof of a medieval house was perhaps the most technologically advanced element of the entire building. A layer of plant material several dozen centimeters thick was laid down, creating an incredibly powerful thermal barrier. Each reed stalk is a sealed capsule of air, and thousands of such stalks created the effect of a down blanket. The angle of the slopes was made very steep, often exceeding 45-50 degrees. This was necessary so that rainwater would roll down immediately without having time to seep into the thickness of the material. In addition, excess snow did not accumulate on the steep roof, which could have broken the structure with its weight. However, a small layer of snow stuck in the unevenness of the straw served as additional external insulation. The roofing technology required a high level of skill. Bundles of straw were tied together and laid in layers, starting from the bottom. The upper layers overlapped the lower ones, creating a continuous water-repellent surface. A properly laid thatched roof could last for half a century without requiring major repairs. It breathed, releasing excess steam from the house, but not letting moisture in from outside. The roof overhang was made very low, sometimes reaching almost to the ground, protecting the walls from wind and slanting rain. This created an additional air gap around the house, protecting the most vulnerable areas where the wall met the ground. Low overhangs also shaded the windows in summer, preventing the sun from overheating the room. A house under such a roof resembled a mushroom growing into the ground for stability. The inside of the roof was often left unlined, exposing a complex system of beams and rafters. These beams were used to store supplies and dry clothes and herbs, using the rising heat. The space under the ridge was the warmest and driest place in the whole house. It was often used as a sleeping area during the most severe frosts. Ventilation was provided through small openings under the ridge, called smoke vents. They could be covered in windy weather to regulate draft and heat retention. This primitive recovery system allowed the air to be refreshed without completely cooling the room. The balance between fresh air and heat was found through experience. The roof was the most expensive part of the house, requiring a huge amount of high-quality material. Gathering suitable reeds or straw took weeks and involved the whole family. Losing the roof to fire or hurricane was a tragedy comparable to the complete loss of the house. Therefore, the roof was monitored particularly carefully, removing moss and replacing rotten areas. Interestingly, thatched roofs had excellent sound insulation. The sound of rain or howling storms was muffled by the soft material, keeping the interior quiet. This created psychological comfort, a feeling of protection from the raging world. In such a house, a person felt like they were in a burrow, cozy and safe. Even today, some countries build luxury homes with thatched roofs, recognizing their unique properties. What was once a sign of poverty has become a symbol of environmental friendliness and efficiency. Ancient technologies are making a comeback, proving their rationality through the centuries. But how did these houses protect their weakest points? Windows and doors. In the next chapter, you will learn how they dealt with this problem. Windows in a medieval house were perhaps the main source of heat loss, so they were treated with particular care. Glass was an exorbitantly expensive material, inaccessible to ordinary peasants, so windows were tiny openings in the wall. Their size was calculated to allow just enough light to enter for work. In winter, these openings were often closed tightly with wooden shutters or plugged with straw mats. Instead of glass, oiled cloth, ox bladders, or thinly tanned hides were used. These materials allowed dim, diffused light to pass through, but did a good job of keeping warm air inside. Of course, nothing could be seen through such glass, but no one was interested in the view from the window. The main function of the window was lighting, not viewing the surroundings. Doors were deliberately made low and narrow, forcing those entering to bow low to the threshold. This was not done out of politeness, but to minimize the area of the opening through which heat escapes when opened. The high threshold served as a barrier to cold air creeping along the ground and protected against drafts. The door leaf was made of thick boards, sometimes in 2 layers, with a layer of insulation in between. The gaps around doors and windows were carefully caulked with moss, wool, or rags. For the winter, the openings were often covered with heavy fabrics or skins from the inside, creating an additional airlock. The entrance to the house was often preceded by a small porch or vestibule. This buffer room allowed cold air to remain outside, preventing it from immediately entering the living area. Tools, firewood, and outerwear were stored in the porch, creating an air gap between the street and the house. The temperature there was intermediate, allowing the body to adapt when entering and exiting. This layout is still used in northern regions as the only correct one. Direct access from the street to the living room was considered an unacceptable waste of heat. The location of windows and doors was also strictly regulated. They were usually placed on the south or east side. The north wall of the house was usually blank, without a single opening, turning it into a shield against cold winds. Sometimes utility rooms were added to the north wall, creating an additional protective belt. On the coldest days, life in the house took place by the light of a fire, as the windows were closed with shutters around the clock. Dim light became the natural environment for the long winter months. People navigated their space by touch, knowing every corner of their home by heart. Ventilation in such conditions was minimal, but natural cracks and the porous structure of the walls prevented suffocation. Fresh air was supplied in measured doses, mixing with the warm indoor air. It was a finely tuned system where any unnecessary draft was ruthlessly eliminated. The struggle for airtightness was an endless war with physics. Wood dried out, clay cracked, fabric tore, and all of this required immediate repair. The owner of the house had to be constantly on the alert, checking the perimeter of his defense against the cold. Every crack was an enemy, every draft a threat. People lived in a state of permanent siege, where the enemy was the climate itself. Ready to learn the truth about what was under their feet? The floor in a medieval house was not just a surface to walk on, but a complex engineering system of thermoregulation. In most cases, it was a compacted earthen floor, but its preparation was a whole ritual. The top layer of soil was removed, covered with a layer of dry sand or clay mixed with straw, and tamped down to the hardness of stone. Such a floor had a stable ground temperature that never dropped below zero, even in the most severe frosts. To cut off the cold coming from below, the floor was generously covered with a thick layer of reeds, straw, or fragrant herbs. This plant-based carpet worked like modern carpet, creating an air cushion underfoot. The layer of bedding was regularly renewed, removing the old and replacing it with fresh, which maintained cleanliness and warmth. Herbs such as mint, wormwood, or lavender were added to the bedding not for beauty, but for disinfection and to repel insects. When walked on, the herbs broke and released essential oils, filling the house with a distinctive but pleasant aroma. It was natural aromatherapy combined with insulation. Wealthy homes could afford woven mats, but the principle remained the same: insulation from the cold ground. In winter, they tried to raise the floor level by increasing the layer of straw, sometimes reaching up to the ankles. This allowed the feet not to touch the cold base and retain body heat. Walking around the house required a certain skill so as not to stumble on the soft covering. Children and the elderly spent a lot of time sitting directly on this warm floor, closer to the hearth. In some regions, wooden flooring was used, but the boards were laid not on the ground but on joists, leaving an air gap. The subfloor was filled with dry moss or leaves for additional insulation. However, wood was expensive and required protection from rot, so earthen floors remained the standard. They were cheap, repairable, and surprisingly practical. Earthen floors had another advantage that was not immediately obvious. They were fireproof. Sparks flying out of the hearth fell to the ground and went out without causing a fire, which was critical in a wooden house. Spilled water was simply absorbed without forming puddles or damaging the floor. It was a self-regulating system that forgave everyday mistakes. Sleeping people often lay on low couches or benches, but a layer of straw on the floor served as a backup sleeping place. On the coldest nights, the whole family could sleep together on the floor, burrowing into straw and skins. Collective warmth was more effective than single beds. Maintaining such a floor required regularity. It had to be swept. Fresh clay had to be sprinkled into the cracks, and the bedding had to be changed. It was endless work, but it guaranteed comfort. A dirty, frozen floor was a sign of a bad housekeeper and a harbinger of disease. We are used to parquet and laminate flooring, but earthen floors served humanity faithfully for thousands of years. They were a connection between man and the earth in the most literal sense of the word. The energy of the earth warmed and sustained life in the home. Do you agree that simple natural materials often surpass synthetic alternatives? What kind of floor do you think would be most practical in a survival situation? Choosing the right place to found a new village or build a single house was never a matter of chance or aesthetic preference. It was a complex, multi-stage analysis of the terrain, taking into account dozens of non-obvious factors on which the physical survival of future generations directly depended. Elders and experienced builders spent months observing nature before driving the first stake into the ground. A mistake at this stage could cost the community its life during the first harsh winter. The ideal and most desirable location was always considered to be the gentle southern slope of a high hill, reliably protected from the icy north winds by the natural terrain. This geographical orientation provided the settlement with maximum sunlight and heat throughout the daylight hours. The slope acted as a giant solar panel, accumulating the sun's energy. This helped to warm up the walls of the houses, which had frozen overnight, and the cooled ground around them much faster. Proximity to a reliable source of drinking water was an essential and indispensable condition for the survival of people and livestock. However, the wisdom of the ancestors dictated a rule: never build houses right on the edge of a river or lake. This was dictated not only by the obvious threat of sudden flooding, but also by the peculiarities of the microclimate near the water. Colder, heavier, and more humid air always accumulated in the lowlands near the river, especially at night. Villages tried to be located at some distance from the shore, on terraces where the air was significantly drier and warmer. Living in constant fog meant condemning oneself to joint and lung diseases and one's supplies to rot. Women had to walk an extra 100 meters with buckets to get water, but it was a reasonable price to pay for dry walls and healthy children. Comfort of living was prioritized over convenience of access to water. The presence of a dense forest nearby was another strategically important factor for survival. The forest was an inexhaustible source of fuel for hearths, building materials for repairs, and game for food. But even more important was the fact that the forest wall served as a powerful natural windbreak. The trees effectively dampened the speed of winter storms, breaking up the icy air currents before they hit the walls of the houses. However, the forest around the new village was cleared with great care and calculation. The builders made sure not to completely strip the settlement and lose this precious green protection. The fields for growing cereals were laid out so that they too would receive maximum sunlight, but were sheltered by the forest to the north. The balance between open space for agriculture and closed space for protection was strictly maintained. The quality of the soil underfoot was also crucial when choosing a site. They categorically avoided swampy areas and areas with high groundwater levels, which could turn life into a nightmare. Building on solid rock foundations was technically difficult and labor-intensive, but it ensured perfectly dry basements. In addition, such a house stood for centuries without settling or cracking. People in the past were masters at reading the landscape, noticing the smallest details and signs of nature. They looked at where the snow melted fastest in spring and where the cold fog lingered until noon. They observed the behavior of animals and the growth of grass, which indicated warm and dry places. These long-term observations formed the basis of the master plan for the construction of future settlements. Villages were often deliberately built in the shape of a horseshoe or a closed ring, open only to the south. This layout created a cozy and protected courtyard inside the settlement, which acted as a trap for the sun. The buildings shielded the center from the wind with their backs, creating a comfortable zone. This shape allowed for the effective accumulation of solar heat without letting it escape. If there was no suitable natural hill in the desired area, people resorted to cunning. They created artificial earth embankments for foundations or used dense forest plantations as a living shield from the wind. People changed the landscape to suit their needs, but did so in strict harmony with the laws of physics and nature. They did not try to conquer the elements, but sought to come to terms with them. Mistakes in choosing a location were punished by nature cruelly and mercilessly. Villages built in constant drafts or damp lowlands often died out from disease or were abandoned by their inhabitants after a couple of years. Stories about such cursed places were passed down by word of mouth as a warning. Natural selection also operated at the level of urban planning. It was a real practical geography of survival, where a map of the area was read as a detailed instruction manual. Every birch grove, every bend in the stream, and every ravine had its own clear functional purpose. The world around was not just a beautiful landscape to contemplate, it was a set of resources and potential threats. People lived within this system, constantly interacting with it. Modern, expensive cottage communities often arrogantly ignore these ancient rules. Developers rely on the power of technology, pumps, and insulation, building houses in beautiful but dangerous lowlands. But when the electricity and heating suddenly go out in winter, the ancient laws of nature reassert themselves. And then it turns out that a good location still determines everything, defining your quality of life. The village was not just a collection of houses, but a single thermal organism where population density played into the hands of the inhabitants. In winter, life was compressed into minimal spaces, with people gathering together in the largest and warmest rooms. Fuel economy forced people to join forces. It is easier to heat one large room than 5 small ones. The presence of a large number of people in a confined space raised the air temperature. The heat emitted by human bodies was a significant contribution to the energy balance of the home. Cramped but not offended. This saying had a literal physical meaning. Work that could be done indoors was moved into the house. Repairing utensils, spinning, processing the harvest. The house was filled with movement, sounds, and warmth from physical activity. Farm buildings were often adjacent to residential buildings, creating additional buffer zones. Stocks of grain, hay, and firewood stacked along the walls served as excellent insulation. The wall behind which the haystack lay did not freeze even in the most severe frosts. The architecture of the settlement sought compactness, reducing the area of external walls in contact with the street. Neighbors helped each other stay warm by keeping an eye on the condition of the roofs and walls of neighboring houses. If someone ran out of firewood, the community made sure they didn't freeze, understanding that the death of one weakens everyone. Mutual assistance was part of the survival strategy, as much a tool as an axe or a flint. Social ties were as strong as the oak beams of the ceilings. Communal bakeries or large hearths were used to cook food for everyone, which also saved precious fuel. After baking bread, the oven remained hot for a long time, and people gathered around it to warm themselves. These places became centers of social life, a kind of interest clubs. Warmth attracted people, forming the social structure of society. At night, canopies, fabric awnings over sleeping places, were used to retain heat. A microclimate was created under such a canopy, which was maintained by the breathing of the sleepers. It was a room within a room, the last refuge of warmth in a cooling house. People slept huddled together, sharing the warmth of their bodies. Clothing was also part of this system. People wore layers of woolen garments indoors. It was not customary to take off your outer clothing at home if the temperature did not allow it. People carried their homes with them, wrapping themselves in all the fabrics available. The concept of home clothing, as we understand it today, did not exist. Minimalism in everyday life was a necessity. Excess furniture interfered with the circulation of warm air from the hearth. The space was organized around the heat source. Everything else was secondary. The corners of the house where the heat did not reach were used only for storage. Life pulsated in the lit and heated center. The density of buildings and population created a unique ecosystem. There was no place for loneliness in it, because loneliness meant cold. A person was part of a group, and only in a group could they survive the winter. This collective survival strategy shaped a community-oriented mentality. Individualism was a luxury of warm countries or rich palaces. Here, amid the snow and wind, we was more important than I. Winter in the Middle Ages was perceived not as a season, but as a long and dangerous siege for which people prepared for months. The village turned into a fortress defending itself against general frost, and supplies were its main ammunition. Barns and storerooms were filled to capacity, as it was practically impossible to leave the village in deep snow. Food was distributed with mathematical precision so that there would be enough until the first harvest. The exterior walls of houses were additionally insulated with sheaves of straw or conifer branches. Snowdrifts were formed. Snowbanks deliberately piled up against the walls of houses served as excellent insulation. Snow, being a porous material, perfectly retained the heat of the earth, preventing the foundation from freezing. Residents maintained these snowdrifts by adding fresh snow after each blizzard. Life in the village slowed down, switching to energy-saving mode. Unnecessary movements were eliminated, and outdoor work was kept to a minimum, only fetching water and firewood. People fell into a kind of social hibernation, spending their days in a semi-daze and doing small household chores. Their metabolism adjusted to the cold and meager diet, slowing down to conserve calories. Lighting was conserved as strictly as food. Torches were lit only when necessary. Darkness became a constant companion, and people learned to live in it, relying on their hearing. Telling stories and legends in the darkness by the hearth was the main entertainment and a way to stay sane. The culture of oral creativity flourished during these long winter evenings. Ventilation holes were plugged, leaving only a small gap for smoke to escape. The air became heavy and thick, but it was warm, and that was the main thing. Hygiene was kept to a minimum, so as not to get cold and waste firewood on heating water. Paradoxically, the layer of dirt and grease on the skin served as additional protection from the cold. Clothes were repaired and patched endlessly. Every scrap of fabric was put to use. Old things were not thrown away, but used as insulation for gaps or bedding. Waste-free production was the norm of life, dictated by the scarcity of resources. Nothing was wasted in this closed cycle of survival. Psychological tension grew as food and firewood supplies dwindled. Conflicts in a confined space were inevitable, but a strict hierarchy and traditions helped to quell them. The authority of the elders was unquestionable, as it was their experience that helped to allocate resources correctly. Spring was awaited as liberation, as a victory over death. The first thaws were celebrated as a holiday, signifying the end of confinement. Survival in winter was the ultimate test of strength for the entire community. Those who passed it became stronger and wiser. Each winter survived was a mark on the memory of a generation. It was a cyclical feat performed annually by ordinary people. Their heroism lay in their patience and ability to wait. The system of preparing for winter had been honed over centuries, leaving no room for improvisation. Everyone knew their maneuver, their role in this defense. One mistake could cost everyone their lives. Summing up our great journey into the past, we can say with confidence that the medieval village was a true triumph of human intellect over a hostile environment. Without access to modern high technology, electricity, and cheap plastic, people were able to create a surprisingly sustainable life support system. They were forced to rely solely on their experience and observation skills to avoid disappearing from the face of the earth. It was a victory of spirit and intellect over the chaos of wild nature, which constantly tried to kill humans. Ancient builders used the immutable laws of physics intuitively, often without even understanding their scientific nature, but feeling them in practice. They masterfully turned the obvious disadvantages of available materials into their main advantages. Ordinary clay, fragile straw, cold snow, and the clever placement of houses, all these elements worked as a single mechanism toward one main goal. This goal was simple and great at the same time: to preserve the spark of life in the icy darkness. This folk architecture was extremely honest, as there was absolutely nothing superfluous, decorative, or random in it. Poor peasants could not afford to waste energy on decorations that had no practical use. Every beam, every stone, and every layer of turf had a clear function, generously paid for with sweat and hard work by many generations. A mistake in calculations or carelessness could cost a family their lives, so shoddy work was out of the question. The true austere beauty of these buildings lay in their absolute rationality and perfect integration into the surrounding landscape. The houses did not compete with nature, trying to stand out, but became its organic continuation, as if growing out of the ground. They mimicked the terrain, hiding from the winds in the lowlands and nestling against the slopes of the hills. Man did not conquer nature, but dissolved into it for the sake of safety. We can clearly see that survival in those days was ensured not only by the thickness of the fortress walls, but also by a complex social organization. The ability to live together, share a confined space, and distribute scarce resources fairly was as important a factor as the availability of dry firewood. The house was only the outer shell, and the inner core was a close-knit community. People understood that even the strongest warrior would not survive the winter alone. Individualism and the desire to live only for oneself in those harsh conditions were a direct and short path to a painful death. Collectivism, mutual assistance, and support for the weak were the only guarantee of the continuation of the clan. Society and architecture were intertwined in a single, inseparable knot that could not be broken. The structure of the house dictated the way of life, and the way of life shaped the structure of the house. Today, in our era of constant energy crises and global environmental problems, we are once again turning to this ancient experience with respect. We suddenly realize that so-called passive houses, the use of natural materials, and strict consideration of windroses are all well-forgotten old practices. Modern architects study dugouts and mud huts to understand the principles of energy efficiency. We are relearning how to conserve resources, looking closely at how masterfully our illiterate ancestors did it. Their lives were unimaginably hard, full of daily deprivation and mortal danger, but they were certainly not meaningless. There was a deep harmony with the surrounding world that we have largely lost in our urban hustle and bustle. They felt the rhythm of nature and adapted to it instead of trying to break it. This gave them a sense of peace even in the midst of a storm. They valued the simple warmth of the hearth as we value gold or currency today, and knew how to preserve it carefully. Warmth was the main value, the currency with which life was bought during the winter months. Their legacy is not only the picturesque ruins of castles that we admire as tourists. Their main legacy is the centuries-old wisdom of simple and effective solutions that have stood the test of time. The medieval village teaches us an important lesson. True comfort is not so much about having advanced technology as it is about competent and thoughtful planning. Keen observation and everyday ingenuity can quite successfully replace kilowatts of expensive energy. If you understand how the wind and sun work, you need less firewood. Understanding natural processes is more important than the powerful tools. Looking back over the centuries, we begin to understand that progress is not always about creating something fundamentally new. Sometimes real progress is simply a deep understanding of old experience in a new stage of development. We are not reinventing the wheel. We are learning to ride it more efficiently. History moves in a spiral, bringing us back to our origins. Their houses made of wood and clay have long since collapsed, rotted away, and become part of the earth from which they were once built. But the fundamental principles underlying them remain eternal, like winter and cold itself. Rationality, logic, and thriftiness never become obsolete or go out of style. This is the foundation on which our modern world stands. We have examined in detail the complex system of daily life that allowed people not just to exist, but to live fully and raise healthy children. These conditions would seem completely unbearable and even deadly to modern pampered people accustomed to central heating. But our ancestors found a way out of any situation, turning an aggressive and hostile environment into their safe home. It was an amazing example of adaptation, where people used a minimum of resources with maximum efficiency. What exactly would you like to see and hear in our next detailed historical videos? It is very important for us to know your opinion so that we can prepare materials that will be truly interesting to you. Perhaps we should take a closer look at the harsh life of the Vikings and their unique secrets of survival in the cold northern seas? Or are you more interested in learning about the inner workings of a huge castle kitchen where grand feasts were prepared for kings and their entourages? Be sure to write your bold suggestions and ideas in the comments below this video. We read all the reviews. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel right now so you don't lose us in the flow of information. There are still many amazing historical discoveries and forgotten stories ahead of us that are not mentioned in textbooks. Stay with us to dive into the past together.